This is Alex Del Sordo and another Zoom podcast. I'm tired. CJ's had me do 3 or 4 of these a day. It's exhausting but fun because I get to talk to people about rowing, which I love. I get to meet new people, which I love. And I get to learn stories. And stories to me are a big thing. And I think Reid Johnson's got a great one. I got Reid Johnson. He's running Pelham Rowing. It's up like North Jersey, New York area. He's been rowing a very long time. We're going to get to know him, his training philosophies. He's a young guy in the sport. And we're going to talk about COVID-19 and how it's affected his team. So Reid, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me on. Really appreciate it.
I'm excited, dude. So listen, I don't know you from Adam, okay? And I start every podcast with the same question. I want to know from stroke one, right? So when you took your first stroke to today, get me in that timeline and tell the listeners a little bit about you and your history.
Yeah, right on. It's definitely a story, and like we said, it's like coaches can tell stories. So I'll just jump right in. I'm originally from Darien, Connecticut, which does not have a youth rowing program, either at the high school or in the community.
So that's shocking because I would have thought every gosh darn team in Connecticut had rowing. It just seems like it's a major rowing part of the world.
Oh, absolutely. But that's, as you guys probably are aware, that's very much on the club level. So Saugatuck, Maritime, what have you. So growing up, my parents got me involved with hockey at about the age of 4. So I was actually a pretty big time hockey player for the formative years of my life, from about the ages of, I got really serious with hockey at about the age of, I wouldn't want to say 8, all the way through 18 years old when I graduated from high school.
Can any 8-year-old be serious about hockey? I mean,
I know. Trust me. I know it's a little bit wild, but I guess the reason why I bring that up is I've always been very attracted to athletics in general, and the team environment. That's how my dad and I really related to each other, really early on. Big time New York Rangers fans. So we bleed blue, right? So in any case, and this is the other reason why I bring that up, is it brought me to Salisbury School. Okay. Salisbury being an all-boys boarding school in the very northwest corner of Connecticut. It's your classic, boarding school setup, big open spaces, incredibly good faculty, very supportive board of trustees, and then, a very incredible, top-notch athletic program. So I went there as a sophomore in high school for many different reasons, but a big one was the hockey program. It's top-notch. That hockey program is consistently sending kids to Division I, scholarship level programs, and then onto the NHL. So that was my brief sort of athletic background, with mixed in with lacrosse, soccer, running, tennis, swim team, the whole thing. So I just lived it. And then when I got to Salisbury in the fall of 2006, again, hockey being the big thing for me, my sophomore year, I didn't end up making the varsity roster as a active player, but I played sort of both varsity and junior varsity. Okay. And then I played lacrosse that spring. And, I was a good lacrosse player. I had a great time with it. Really enjoyed it. But, I just sort of remember, looking, I wanted something different. I wanted to be out of a hockey rink. I wanted to be outside, sort of, feeling a little bit free, right? Like equipment free, so to speak. Yeah. My grandfather actually rowed at Princeton University in the 50s. So he graduated in 58 from Princeton. He was an Eastern Sprints champion in 57 with the lightweight varsity 8.
What?
Yeah.
You're talking 1950s Princeton royalty. Like that's, right. I'm a huge history buff of rowing.
Right on. I was a history major in college. So
there we go. We have something in common. What a time to be rowing Eastern Sprints. Right. Mm-hmm. And you're saying it was your grandfather.
Yep.
1958 sprints winner.
Yep.
Did he carry on rowing after that? I mean, was he alive for you to kind of see any of that? Or did he just stop rowing after college?
Yeah. So what ended up happening there, Alex, was so they won sprints. He was in the light varsity 8, and then they went on to Henley. They won the Thames Cup, which I believe now is more of a club level event at Henley, right? But I believe in the day it was mostly for students. And anyway, so he actually, so he graduates from Princeton in '58, and he goes and joins the Navy at the ripe age of 21. And then in between graduating and joining the Navy, he met my grandmother. So they got married really young, like most people did in those days. And so his rowing career was over after graduation. He didn't.
Wow.
I'm not aware of any club level or national team stuff from him. What I do know is this, though, and this is part of my story about rowing, is it was by far and away one of his most fond memories in his life. He ended up being, his name is Leonard Yerkes, by the way. Leonard, again, my grandfather, ended up being a major part of the board of trustees for the Princeton University Rowing Association for many years.
Wow.
And so when they rebuilt the Shea Rowing Center in like 2000, 2001, he was on their fundraising committee for that. Yeah, so if you've actually ever been to the Princeton Boathouse, and you walk, which I'm sure most people have that listen to this, when you walk in the main doors, he's on the wall. Right as you walk in, he's to the left. There's a picture of you're looking at the backs of them. They're at Henley. And on the top of the picture is them getting their award, their medals for winning the Thames Cup. So,
I'm speechless. I mean, I don't usually get speechless. This is awesome. I love this.
And to be honest with you, I didn't know about this growing up. I didn't have a sense of this. My mother went to Princeton as well, so she, it's kind of a thing. So my great grandfather also went there and rowed a little bit in the '30s, like not like this, but he did row for a bit.
Okay.
So I was always aware of it. So anyway, I get to Salisbury School. I'm looking for something different. I get on the phone with him, because why not? He's my grandfather. And he suggests I go try rowing. So Salisbury School, like I said, incredible athletic program, and just one of the absolute very best coaching staffs and set up for rowing anywhere, period. Most people probably haven't been there, but what also helped was they had just rebuilt the boathouse to the tune of like a $3 million price tag. So that helped get me and some other athletes down to the boathouse. We actually have our own lake there too. So it's called the Twin Lakes, and it's very much your classic schoolboy New England's program. We don't really, or in my day, I know it's changed now, but we didn't row in the fall. We didn't really train the winter because you're required to play 3 sports. So my first rowing experience, again, like mixed with my grandfather, mixed with the coaching staff, who also is those are your teachers in the classroom as well. I had the bright idea of hopping on the bus my junior year to go down to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And that would have been in the spring of March, 2008. And my first strokes were in Oak Ridge, Tennessee in the snow. And but it just had me hooked right away. I just loved the energy. A man by the name of Dick Curtis, who's been very, very involved with rowing since the 60s when he was a student athlete at Boston University. He spent a lot of time on the national team. He actually ended up making the 80 team that didn't go because of the boycott, right? Yeah. Anyway, so he's still at Salisbury. He doesn't really run the program anymore, but he did at the time. He brought up guys like Elliot Hovey, Porter Collins, Brad Wernz, if you know that name.
Of course.
Gordon Getzinger is a good friend of mine. Gordon is the Saugatuck girls head coach, and they're obviously crushing it. He's a Salisbury guy. Kerry Wasserman, the head coach at Greenwich, another Salisbury guy. So this is sort of the lineage that I found myself in, and I was hooked right away. And anyway, so
I got to interrupt. There's, you're a convert. Typically what we find in rowing is like a lot of kids don't like rowing, so they become a lax bro, or they just go do that kind of stuff. You're the exact opposite. You were a lax bro, hockey bro, and you became a rower. That's
right.
that's rare air, dude. There's not a lot that happens.
I tell people this story, Alex, and I tell them my hockey background, and I'm like, like a lot of the questions I get, because again, it's a very robust hockey program at Salisbury. They're like, who'd you play with? And, like a guy like Chris Kreider, a winger for the New York Rangers, he and I did some stuff together. But my point is I just was so attracted to what rowing represented. Obviously my grandfather helped that situation, but it was it was the fellowship and the camaraderie of the Salisbury program that, again, Dick Curtis was running at the time. It was just incredible, the energy. So learning how to row in the snow, like it was like the best experience ever. I was hooked right away. I ended up, I had never been on an erg before, and we had to get on and do a 2K, right? I think I went like 7:01 or something like that. Like first 2K ever, just like ripping at like 25, 26 strokes a minute, just like, flailing around, just like whatever. But again, like I was hooked, and then I ended up making the third boat for that spring. We ended up getting a bronze medal at the New England Championships in Worcester.
Nice.
And then from there, with the encouragement of one of the assistant coaches by the name of Tote Smith, he's a Yale guy, Yale lightweight for Andy Card in the 90s. He's now running the program at Brooks School in Massachusetts. But Tote sort of sunk his teeth into me, again, knowing my grandfather's background and the whole Princeton thing, right? He suggested that I go and try rowing a little bit more seriously at Penn AC that summer. So I go from learning how to row in the middle of March in the snow in 2008 to I find myself on the Schuylkill River in June 2008 at one of the preeminent, rowing clubs and programs in the country, right? And because what else was there to do? That's just sort of how the Salisbury program operates. It's like, let's get these kids going, right?
Wow.
Let's get them out of the rink. Let's get them off the field into a boat. So I think my introduction to rowing was certainly Salisbury, but truly in a lot of ways it was Penn AC.
So Penn AC,
yeah.
So Salisbury, obviously history of rowing, but Penn AC, when you walk into that boathouse, there's a smell. There's a vision of what rowing is for 150 years. And I think as a young athlete, that's probably what you gravitated towards, right?
100%.
The quality of boats, really the variety of shells, and then that picturesque view on the boathouse, like on the dock, overlooking the museum, right? And then knowing that because of your grandfather and how much you love and appreciate history, knowing all the great athletes that stepped on that dock for 150 years. I mean, I would kill at the age of 15 or 16 to have that experience, right? And you have that. That's awesome.
It was once in a lifetime. And what was really interesting about that summer at Penn AC was there was a little bit of stuff that had happened the summer before. I don't really know what it was, but they had actually moved the Penn AC junior athletes out of the dorms at Penn, and they told us we had to, my group, that we had to get our own living arrangements. So I was at the ripe old age of 17 living with two Colgate guys that had made the under 23 pair that summer, to represent the U.S. obviously internationally, and then three of my buddies, another Salisbury guy, and then two Chaminade guys from Long Island. We had our own place together. It was sort of set right above the Wharton School of Business.
Let me just stop you right there. I have two children, and I would not let my 17-year-old son live with two college kids and three buddies from Chaminade alone in Philadelphia. I mean, your parents must really respect and trust you, because I would not do that.
I think those stories are certainly for another time, probably not for this podcast, but we definitely had our fair share of fun. But what I think the bigger point there, and like Alex, like you alluded to with the history of Penn AC and the incredible athletes, like the Ted Nash era, the Tom Bohr era, right? Sort of how those crews were built on the Schuylkill, launching off that dock, every day, 2 or 3 times a day, right? And then mixed with for example, summer of '08, Wisco had just won the national championship, right? The IRA. And like 2 or 3 of their guys came right out of that crew and were at Penn AC that summer training as well. So it's just like,
hold on. Was that McMullen didn't do that, did he? Did Joe McMullen do that? So like I graduated in '08 from GW. So okay. I was at that IRA and I watched. Joe McMullen's a really good friend of mine.
Cool.
And he was bow seat of that 8.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, I forget who went out there. I think he did. Can't remember.
It's possible. All I just remember is, and like we had no interaction with these like under 23 senior guys because they looked at us and they were like, we're like the annoying little mosquitoes. Like
you're kids,
right? We're kids. Yeah. But I just remember. I mean, I'm all about 5'10". Like I'm a lightweight size guy that just wanted to play ball with the big dudes. And you know these 6'5", 6'8", just full of muscle and ripping 550 ergs at rate 32. It's just like you kind of get immersed in that. And then I just remember being like, holy, like what am I got myself into? So, but the thing was, I didn't really know how to row yet. Like I did, but I didn't. Not to their standards, of course, right? So. Sure. And this is something that I always remember, and I tell anyone that I coach, who's frustrated, upset, doesn't know why why does the coach pick on me, kind of thing, right? And because we always take those things personally. And again, here I come, a high-level boarding school athlete, varsity level athlete at Salisbury School, and I was put in my place, not in a bad way, but just so quickly. That we spent a lot of time in Cox Fours that summer. I had 2 coaches, Ryan Strauss and Austin Nichols. I don't know if you guys know those guys, but really good guys that really helped me sort of understand the finer points of the stroke and sort of the sport. So I was the 2 seat of every Cox Four. I was in every boat was port rigged, so I was 2 seat, and I was not referred to by name for a while. I was 2 seat, like I didn't honestly see that as demeaning. I saw that as very clear, concise instruction about what I needed to do. So, bow pair of these Cox Fours were doing legs only drills for about 3 miles at a time on the square, just up and down the Schuylkill River. I'll never forget it. And then when I learned how to connect the blade to the boat, leverage that into the foot plate, sort of hang your weight off that handle. After doing all these just methodical drill, I ended up being the 7th seat of the 8 that summer at Penn AC.
Oh wow!
And so again, that's what I sort of tell young athletes. It's like, you gotta literally crawl before you can walk, and you have to walk before you can run in our sport. So anyway, that's sort of baptism by fire for me. We go up to Canadian Henley, we do pretty well, have a great time, and then I get back to Salisbury for my senior year. I had made the varsity team for hockey that year. We ended up winning the New England Championship, which is a big deal for that, for that community of people. And I had actually been, I've been recruited to a few schools, more Division III for hockey, but I'd sort of had an eye for going to play juniors after Salisbury. Take a year or 2 off, get recruited. But as it turns out, my best friend to this day, I was the best man at his wedding, a guy by the name of Cody Burgess. He and I had been rowing together, and he really wanted to go to Hobart. And this was the spring of '09. And that was the one school that I applied to because of him, really. It also helped that my mom's college roommate from Princeton is a professor up there at HWS. And so I sort of applied on a whim. I got in, and I went back and forth on this for the whole year, right? And so at the time, I was thinking junior hockey. And then we had actually had a really good senior season that spring. Our 1V and 2V at Salisbury were very top notch, going toe to toe with Kent, Andover, Exeter, St. Paul's.
That's aggressively fast.
Yeah. And so both those crews, if I remember correctly, ended up medaling at NERAs at the New England Scholastic Championships. And I got off the dock that day with my medal. I believe it was a bronze. And I just remember thinking like, wow, maybe this is really what I want to do. And like, mind you, this is like 2 weeks before graduation. I hadn't really made any decisions. I get back to my dorm room at Salisbury. Things are starting to clear out. Underclassmen are leaving. Families are about to come to campus for graduation ceremonies. And I remember calling my dad and basically saying, look, like, this is what I really want to do. And I've gotten into Hobart, and my best friend and roommate's going too. That's where I'm going to go.
Wow.
So we sent my deposit in a week before graduation, spring of 09. And then I was on the Hobart campus in the fall of 09 as a, varsity level rower.
And so I want to go back to something really quick. So
yeah.
I think this. Our sport, our sport, rowing, is lacking something. Okay. It doesn't have the pizzazz and excitement like lacrosse does. It doesn't have maybe the following that hockey does. And you competed in 2 high-level programs.
Yep.
Hockey and rowing. What is rowing missing right now as a sport to be on the same level as lacrosse or hockey?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's actually a question that I sort of grapple with all the time. And I certainly don't obviously have the right answer. Maybe I have my opinions. I think right off the top, I think we as a community could do a better job of explaining that rowing isn't just a sport that requires sort of, I don't want to sound harsh, but there's barrier to entry in these other sports, right? You have to be at a certain level of athleticism, right, to be a lacrosse athlete in my neck of the woods, or a hockey player, or what have you, right? And I think it's a general misconception that rowers are bad athletes. I think that, and I can get into this a little bit more with my coaching background, but the best kids that I've coached in the sport of, or athletes, I should say, in the sport of rowing, are also tremendous athletes. These are kids that could legitimately go, not to, unlike myself, could go and play other sports. So I think I think there's that. Just delivering the message in a way that it's like, we obviously want people to come row, right? We want athletes, all these, especially junior clubs, that space is really growing in the US. We want to attract a lot of people, and obviously all these clubs need revenue. So I think delivering a message that, it's not an unathletic sport, right? And so, that can be tricky, but I think is doable. I think another big thing is just, you typically get these kids early on, and they get so disenfranchised by the machine. They think it's too hard, right? And I'm hesitant to use the word burnout necessarily, but to capture their interest in a way that makes rowing feel a little bit more holistic and a little bit more of a process, rather than just hang and bang for 2,000 meters on an erg machine and try to break 7 minutes, 6:30, 6:20, what have you, right?
How do we make our sport cool in the eyes of young kids? Like, so, when I was growing up, it's like, there was the Mighty Ducks movie. I mean, I was like, It's the greatest freaking movie of all time. I want to be a hockey player.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, like, what do you think, as someone who runs a program?
Yeah.
How do you make it cool?
I think sort of, just the things that I've mentioned about sort of how you deliver the message about, what is rowing and sort of what is it in the United States and on the club level. I think that we could do a much better job in general of really talking about, and Alex obviously being a history guy, the history of our sport. It's I mean, if you know anything about it, it's the oldest intercollegiate varsity level sport in the United States and maybe the world, right? The Harvard-Yale race, and started on Lake Winnipesaukee in the 1850s. And just kind of getting out of the mold of just like it's just this like buttoned up East Coast sort of elitist sport, right? And so I think delivering that message, and then more directly to like make it cool. I think that really comes from the head coach and sort of how does he or she, right, interact with their athletes in a way where it's welcoming but challenging at the same time. Because I think what ends up happening is there's this pretty polar opposite from what I've seen, just kind of like, you know, going around looking at other programs. It's either like you're literally the fun club, or like you're this elite level, like 30K a day club. You know what I mean? And there's like no in between. There's no like, and I think just, and that's tough to address, right? Because there is so much barrier to entry. You know, rowing is an expensive sport. You've got to have these facilities. You have to have these boats, oars, ergs, what have you. But it just, to me, it feels like a lot of all or nothing. And I think that to make it cool is to make it accessible in a way that feels not only welcoming, but also challenging at the same time, right? And sort of respecting kids on their level. And so I think ways to do that is like, you know, get kids out in these trainer singles, right? Like have them go mess around, like make them feel like they can really like build skill in a sport, right? Because I think that's what sports like hockey, basketball, lacrosse, soccer sort of have over us is like, because I hear kids say this all the time. It's like, you know, do we have to do this again, right? Like, what's the point of this? And there is some truth to that, right? But, you know, based on my own experience, my own background, and working with the athletes that I've had the good fortune of working with at these programs, they really treat it as very much a skill-based, you know, process where there's actual structure to it. And it's not just, again, it's, you see what I'm saying? It's like there's more to it. I think that a lot of, like, for example, like for me in my program, not that we're at this point yet in the talk, but we do steady state in a very, very relaxed, easygoing manner. And I can get more into that later. But like, you have to keep these kids coming back, and the more they come back and the more kids want to do it, the more it's just going to seem cool, you know, because the more kids that we get involved and the more that they talk about it at school, that they've got this like really crazy, engaging storyteller, you know, coach at Greenwich or Pelham or Saugatuck, you know, clubs in our area, it sort of builds on itself, right? Yeah, I think it's very much at that grassroots level.
I don't want you to confuse my silence with not understanding you. It's because typically I'm the one that does a lot of the talking in these, and
Okay.
I'm a very talkative person. But what you're saying, I'm writing 3 pages of notes on, because what you're saying is the question that we've been trying to answer for a long time. And to hear it from a coach who does it for a living, right?
Mm-hmm.
To hear from a coach who like has been at those levels, is powerful. So I'm spending a lot of my time listening to what you're saying. Mm-hmm. You know, here's the reality. We have a distance, 2,000 meters, that has been around for a long time. We have a style of training that is very difficult for the average person to do and to understand. Right. Like, if you're new to the sport and you do 3x20, you're like, what the hell am I doing? Like why am I doing this?
This is horrible. Right.
It's terrible, right? Or then, so let's say your first erg, you went 7:01, but the coach said to you, you got to go 6:30 to make that varsity 8. Well, I don't comprehend that as someone who's new to the sport, of course. Right? So that the reality is there is a misunderstanding of what you need to be like to be successful in this sport.
That's right.
5'10",
that's right.
Nothing, going up against guys 6'6" who are just better than you, right? But that's the motivation you need to go harder and work harder. So the visual of rowing needs to be changed, right? Yeah. How we present the sport, how we look at the sport needs to be changed, because ultimately Pelham, you, us, we all want more people rowing.
That's right.
We want to be on ESPN. I want to be able to turn on ESPN and see the top 100 high school athletes today. Mm-hmm. And I want to see who's coming down the pike. And I want to talk about who's going to be the next Olympian. Mm-hmm. That stuff is awesome. That's like watching Wayne Gretzky grow up, right? That's right. So I'm with you, and forgive me if I'm quiet. I'm writing everything you're saying. And we're going to keep getting back to this, but I looked up your profile. So you coached Princeton,
That's right? That's
right. All right. Let's get to that point in your life.
Sure.
For a guy who's 5'10", I'm 6'3".
Yep.
I'm already irritated by you. I'm like, look at this guy. 5-0. What does he think he is? But no, I'm kidding. But you were under Greg Hughes.
Yep.
You graduate Hobart.
Yep.
I'm not too worried about how well you did there. I'm sure you did fine. I'm sure you had success. You fell in love with the sport even more. How did you go from graduating Hobart to coaching Princeton for a couple of years?
Yeah, that's another great question, and definitely some stories there. So just starting off with the Hobart piece, just briefly, there was a coaching change after my sophomore year.
Okay.
That has turned into a very different direction for the program.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's the guy that came in my junior fall, a man by the name of Paul Bugenhagen.
We know him well.
Of course, most people do. You say Bugenhagen and they're like, what? I know that name. So he comes from Bucknell my junior year to run our program. And sort of I immediately gravitated towards him. He's again an undersized guy who's made a real mark in the sport in a lot of ways. Definitely that chip on the shoulder underdog mentality, and sort of take on the world approach. But again, sort of what I was talking about in terms of the training, it was very methodical. It was the first time I had trained with a heart rate monitor. It was the first time that I had been introduced to more of the mental aspects of being an athlete, not just a rower. So we did a lot of meditation, what we called quiet sitting. And that actually came from, and you guys also absolutely know this name, Jimmy Joy, who the Joy of Sculling Conference, right? That's his thing. He was the Canadian national team director, technical director in the 80s. He's run a lot of college programs, Yale, MIT, Wesleyan. And then he actually ended up running the Hobart program for a number of years, left the program, but stayed in Geneva. Anyway, so when Paul came to Hobart, he brought Jimmy back into the mix as like a kind of a consultant. So I sort of got another baptism by fire in sort of the technical and physiological and mental qualities of what it means to be an athlete in our sport. And then through that, as I'm approaching my senior spring up at Hobart 2013, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And Paul had sort of suggested to me, actually, hey, I really want you to think about this coaching thing. I think that, based on sort of our work together and my experiences and this, that, everything else, would you want to kind of come be the, unpaid volunteer intern assistant at Hobart, next year? And thought a lot about that. I grappled with it. And at the end of the day, it didn't really feel right at the time. I kind of wanted to, get off campus, and I'd been there for 4 years, and right. But keeping in touch with Paul and he's certainly a mentor of mine.
Yeah.
I was looking for, so that next year I actually worked at a gym part-time. I lived at home, again, just trying to get my feet set, figured out. So I actually took a year off from rowing entirely. And then that summer, I was working up at a summer boarding school up in New Hampshire called Wolfboro, where I was the director of their recreation program.
Yeah.
And I got a call from a buddy of mine whose name is by the name of Dave Grossman. He's another Hobart guy, and he's actually running the Saugatuck boys program right now. And he was an assistant coach at Saugatuck at the time, and he just rang me up and was like, hey, would you want to be our novice coach for this fall? And sort of, again, not really knowing what I wanted to do, but also kind of knowing what I wanted to do, just didn't really know how to go about it. That, like, him extending that hand at that time was like incredibly powerful. And I hope I've thanked him for that. If he listens to this, Dave, thank you for doing that. Because, again, with the instruction and coaching I got from Paul Bugenhagen and Jimmy Joy at Hobart, and again, the background that I've had in my family, which I've described, it just made sense. So I jumped right in at Saugatuck. I was a novice boys coach for all of 10 months. The boys crushed it. I think we went undefeated all fall. And then we lost maybe one race in the spring. We retooled a little bit, and we came back. We went to the Northeast Regionals. This is in the spring of 2015 in Lowell, Mass. We went to the Northeast Regionals, and my novice 8 was actually the second varsity 8 because they were just pretty good. And we won that event. We beat a good CRI crew, with a bunch of novices. And I just want to give a quick shout out. Out of that boat's actually come an athlete by the name of Harry Burke, who's one of the only, if not the only, 3 years in a row medalist at Junior Worlds. He won a medal in the Coxed 4 after sophomore year. He won a medal in the 8 after junior year, and he won a medal in the 8 after his senior year. So I had the good fortune of introducing the sport to him and teaching him the my methods, and he's now at Harvard. He was in their 2V last spring as a freshman that won sprints and the Harvard Yale race for that event. So working with an athlete like that also really kind of like I sort of realized early on, like the approach that I was sort of talking about making our sport cool and all that. He went 6:30 as a freshman in high school. After his first erg test with me, guys, he went 2:08 for 20 minutes. So I got my hands on this kid who was kind of like a butterball, classic, like chubby kid who just didn't really know what. He's a freshman at Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut. His parents threw him in the rowing fire, and I just, happened to be at the right place, right time. I remember we did a 20-minute test in preseason at the end of August in 2014, and in May of 2015, he went 6:30. So
that does not happen all that often. And I think why he is, Harvard and going in that's a double stuffed Oreo becoming like I don't know, like a piece of wood or something. I don't know how else to describe it.
So from there, and again, working at a high level outfit like Saugatuck, run by the guys, Row America Wintech, right? That really helped continue, my desire to be a coach. Chase Graham, who's now at Duke, was the head girls coach at the time at Saugatuck. He and I became fast friends that year. I ended up helping him out sort of on the side with some of his athletes, coaching them in pairs and singles and stuff like that. Just
well.
Yeah. Chase, great guy, still a good friend of mine to this day. So he and I and Gordon Getzinger as well was the assistant coach at Saugatuck at the time. We'd all get together a lot and just talk rowing. We talk training, we talk the nuances of the stroke. And then the three of us would get on the erg together. So we actually did a winter training protocol, the three of us as coaches that winter at Saugatuck. I was doing 17 to 20K a day for about 3 months straight, and with Chase and Gordon. And so,
the camaraderie built around rowing is something special. But listen, I gotta direct you to this question. So you were at Princeton. So
no, I'm getting there.
I'm getting there. You had this time at Saugatuck.
Yeah.
And you had success, obvious.
Yep.
Walk me through the interview process at Princeton.
Yeah, sure. So I, and the reason why I, bring up Paul Bugenhagen for the obvious reasons, but the biggest one here is that he was in he'll probably listen to this and fact check me on this, but early 2000s, let's just call it that. He was the intern assistant under Curtis Jordan at Princeton for a year, in the sort of Sam Locke, Steve Coppola era. And so Paul's experience at Princeton, my grandfather being a rowing trustee there and being a rowing athlete at Princeton, my mom she ran cross country and track at Princeton as well, right? So it sort of made sense that if I was going to be a coach and I really wanted to do this, I needed to take a massive step and sort of bet on myself. And so combine all of that, and I start emailing with Greg in maybe March of that spring, March of 2015. And I did it completely on a whim. I had a part-time job at a gym I'll never forget. I very nervously sent this email to Greg that morning, like March 2015. And I didn't really expect anything, to be honest, guys. I really didn't. I mean, so anyway, he got back to me 2 or 3 weeks later, maybe, and was just like, hey, Reid, good to hear from you. I know your grandfather really well. He's really helped out our program in a lot of ways. And, thanks for reaching out. The sort of intern assistant spot that you're talking about is currently occupied, but there's always turnover. So, I'll certainly reach back out, as we approach sprints and getting the IRA. And
how did that, what was going through your mind and your heart and your body when you got that email? Because you have been elated.
I was like, it's like when I guess my stomach sort of dropped to the floor. It was like one of those feelings. It was just like, oh my God, this like actually might happen. Holy crap. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but like, I'm just going to try to play this so cool. So I just sent him an email back, just being, cause it's email, right? Like, thank you, Greg, so much. Like, wish you the best of luck this spring, go Tigers kind of thing. And then I sent him a couple emails just following up, cause squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Like you kind of have to be diligent with this stuff, especially in our, tight knit, coaching community. And then, so I
want to repeat what you just said, because as people watch this and listen to this, I'm always hoping that coaches watch it and or future coaches.
Yep.
Just like you said, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yep.
You have to be persistent in our sport. And I'm going to repeat,
have to.
If you are not persistent in any aspect of your life, you will not get the things that you want and desire. I just need people to really understand that. So I'm glad to hear that you said that.
Good. So May rolls around and they go to sprints. They do really well. I send another follow-up email. We did really well at Northeast Regionals. Not that Greg really cares, because like it's
whatever.
That's like T-ball compared to Princeton, right? But it just showed that I had some real interest, and my kids are doing well, so that's great. And then June, July roll around. I'd been helping Chase Graham get the girls ready for the Youth National Regatta that, where they ended up crushing it. The girls won the 8. Mm-hmm. And that started their run, actually, that they're still on. And anyway, kept following up. The intern at the time took a position, I believe, at Penn. And this was like the end of June, early July. So again, mind you, let's backtrack. I started emailing with Greg in March. And I was not offered this position until the third week of July.
Well, there's a common theme here for you. You started rowing in March, and you're in the belly of the beast in July. You reach out to a guy in March, and you're in the belly of the beast in July.
So he had I'd actually been interviewing for a position out at Long Beach Rowing, California, which I had been offered, but sort of, I had been upfront with them and just said, hey, look, like I am talking to this place called Princeton. And they were like, yeah, we totally get it. So anyway, so that was sort of plan B if Princeton didn't work out. And then again, right place, right time, very persistent, just kind of stayed the course. I didn't really care if he ever responded to my emails or not, because I knew he would probably read them anyway. Mm-hmm. And there I was, third week of July, we're on the phone and he's like, well, when can you be here? And I was like, I just remember being, again, like sort of Alex, how you alluded to, it's like, what's the feeling? Like my head was spinning, I just didn't know. I mean, I rode at Salisbury, I rode at Hobart, 2 great places, obviously not the level of Princeton. And there I was, packing up my car first week of August, hit 995 South pretty quickly, going to the boathouse.
Just top down, windows open, just going, and you can't have a thought in your head that lasts more than 10 seconds. You are just so excited to start your new life, man. I have been there. Yeah. And I know what you're talking about, and it's very hard to eloquently describe that sensation, that feeling, right?
That's right.
And you're showing it in your facial expressions, and that's why I appreciate so much this Zoom ability. So you do this. What's your day one like? You walk up to Princeton's boathouse. Yeah. It is one of the meccas of rowing, right? Like
100%.
Beautiful boathouse, picturesque, a little bridge over there. Mm-hmm. What's day one like for you? What happens?
So there, not a lot of people know this, but there's a big apartment in the back of the boathouse. You go up the set of stairs all the way, and then if you were to walk straight and turn right, you'd go into the big ballroom there.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of turning right there, you actually hook back to your left and you go back towards the women's locker room. And there's a fully furnished 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, apartment back there. So that was obviously a big deal, getting free housing. So I move in there and I'm sitting on my couch that I had worked out. Like the guy's moving out, I'd worked some stuff out, could you leave the furniture? Here's like $100, whatever. So they left a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And Steve Coppola comes knocking on my door. Steve being the Cornell women's head coach now, obviously, big time athlete in our sport, Beijing bronze medalist.
Yeah.
I know who he is, and he now knows who I am because I'm the, intern heavyweight assistant coach for Greg Hughes. And he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Yeah, just moved in, sitting here." It's like an August day. It's like Jersey swamp heat, right?
Yeah, I know well.
Just cooling my heels. And he's like, "You want me to show you some stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And he's like, "Bring your boots. This and this. This might get a little messy." He took me out in the barge, the course launch.
Yeah.
And we pulled some buoys and did some work on the course, on the grid there at Princeton with the wiring. And so again, just keeping with the theme of baptism by fire, there I was in the middle of like Carnegie doing buoy stuff and coursework with Steve Coppola on day one.
I'm gonna change the questions a little bit here, just because you brought me into a 2,000 meter course. So,
yep.
Your story is fascinating, and I have a feeling that we're going to be doing a part 2 with you, just because you speak so clearly. We just started this thing called Coaches Yelling.
Okay.
And it's a lot like Round the Horn. It's exactly like Round the Horn.
Love it.
We just launched our first episode yesterday. We have a special guest, I believe, coming on for tomorrow when we record it. It's going to blow your mind who we have. It's pretty cool. But we had Luke Walton, a former Olympian Cal Bear. We had Mike Wallen, Kerry Simmons, and a really close friend of mine, Zach Eberson.
Cool.
Anyway, the question was, what do you think would happen in the future of rowing if the 2,000 meter course was changed, if we did a different distance?
Okay.
I bring this up because you spent your day one focusing on the course that's historic at Princeton. Going back to one of my questions of how do we make this fun, what do you think happens to our sport if we change the distance to, say, 1,250 or 1,500 or 1,000?
I think right off the top, and this is the knock against, it's not a spectator sport, it would accommodate more sort of in-person viewership right away, right? Shorter course, means you can, as a spectator, you're sitting there in the stands or you're on the towpath or what have you, you can basically see the start to finish, right? 1.2 miles, it's impossible. And so I think right away, the spectatorship would increase. I think that obviously the racing would become a lot more intense. And I think the other big thing is we would now be able to market our athletes in a sort of a la Michael Phelps swimming style way where, they could do multiple events, in a week of racing, what have you, right? Because the shorter the course, the less, physiologically demanding it is, so to speak, in a lot of ways, right? I think that would also be a real thing, right? A guy could go from the single to the pair to the 4 to the 8, pretty easily. So I like many others, certainly, am comfortable with the 2,000 meter distance, training the athletes and what have you. But I think a bit of a shakeup and a change of pace could be really good for our sport in that sense.
This ends episode 1 of 2 with Reid Johnson. We are going to have a follow-up with Reid Johnson, and you're going to see this immediately after. We got a guy who was a hockey player. He was a hockey bro, lax convert, becomes a rower, 5'10", 100 and nothing pounds. His grandfather is in the history books of Princeton rowing. He understands the sport better than most, and he's running Pelham. When we get back for the next episode, we're going to be talking about his experience as a coach of young athletes. I hope you've enjoyed this episode so far. Thanks for watching. This is the Rower's Choice Podcast. Rower's Choice is made up of Finish Line Shell Repair, Resolute Racing Shells, and Sykes USA.